This is the introduction to the 7 deadly sins and their contrasting virtues. In the past, there have been a number of television programs discussing such topics as the 7 deadly sins and the 10 commandments. A wide selection of people, often celebrities, were asked for their views, and invariably they all had different ideas as to what is wrong and what is not. Without God's word as our yardstick, it's unlikely that many of us would agree on what is unacceptable or on the degree of unacceptability. After a survey of 1,001 adults in Britain, an alternative list of deadly sins was compiled, and it was put into order of worst first. So the alternative deadly sins that people came up with were cruelty, adultery, then bigotry, dishonesty, hypocrisy, selfishness, and lastly greed, whereas the original deadly sins were pride, greed, envy, anger, lust, gluttony, and sloth. So quite different. Interestingly, the only one that's on the original list is greed. Many thought that sloth and gluttony and lust were not bad at all, and apparently 9% of the respondents said that they had never committed any of the original deadly sins. So much for human opinion. So what is the origin of the 7 deadly sins? There's no such phrase in the Bible, and yet everyone has heard of the term. Its origins go back to Pope St. Gregory the Great, who died in 604 AD, who introduced the 7 deadly sins in his book Moralia in Job. Pope Gregory put his list in order of the degree to which he considered they offended against love, and his order was pride, envy, anger, greed, sadness, gluttony, and lust. But later, however, the Italian philosopher and the famous theologian Thomas Aquinas, who lived 1225 to 1273, disagreed with the idea that the 7 deadly sins should be ranked in order. The Catholic Encyclopedia states this: according to St. Thomas, a capital vice is that which has an exceedingly desirable end, so that in his desire for it a man goes on the commission of many sins, all of which are said to originate in that vice as their chief source. It's not then the gravity of the vice in itself that makes it capital, but rather the fact that it gives rise to so many other sins. It's interesting to note that each of the original 7 deadly sins has more to do with a person's thoughts and attitudes than it has to do with their actions. In this, the Catholic concept of sin was correct, as before every action, there is a thought. They recognised that if a person's thoughts and attitudes were pure, they were less likely to go on and commit a sinful deed. Thus, such actions as murder, adultery, theft, lying, slander, and filthy language are not on the list, as instead of each of these, they were seen to be the possible result of one of the deadly sins. This agrees with what Christ said in Matthew 15:18-19, which says, "But the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart, and these make a man unclean. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, and slander." The traditional list of the 7 deadly sins is given in the notes at the bottom of the screen, together with a list of the virtues against which they're sins. There's no set list of virtues that correspond to the 7 deadly sins, so I've listed those that are most often referred to. And those in brackets are termed the 7 contrary virtues, and they were derived from an epic poem written by Prudentius around 410 AD, and they were called the Psychomachia, the battle for the soul. It was alleged that practicing these virtues protected you against temptation towards the 7 deadly sins. So, pride was contrasted with humility, and greed with generosity, envy with love, anger with kindness, lust with self-control, gluttony with temperance, and finally sloth with zeal. So as can be seen from these lists, different people have slightly different opinions as to which words describe the opposite of these sins most succinctly. We might choose slightly different contrary virtues. In particular, The opposite of envy might be considered more accurately to be contentment rather than love or kindness. However, when the definition of Christian love is considered in detail later on, it becomes clearer why many considered this to be the opposite of envy. The official catechism of the Catholic Church, which consists of 2,865 numbered sections, was first published in 1992 by order of Pope John Paul II, and it includes the 7 deadly sins in one paragraph. And although this list of the 7 deadly sins doesn't appear in the Bible as such, there's plenty of passages which include several of them collected together. So in these talks, we're going to look at what the Bible has to say about the 7 deadly sins and balance it up with the 7 corresponding virtues mentioned.